They told us the locks were a stroke of genius, a brilliant solution to conquer topography. But what if they are not a monument to ingenuity, but a scar, a primitive patch on a technology we no longer comprehend? We are asked to believe that a civilization capable of reshaping continents with surgical precision chose to transport its future on the back of a tired mule. Have you ever looked at these impossible structures and felt a deep, logical hum of wrongness? If you feel this static in the timeline, leave your mark below. From where and from what time are you watching this transmission? And so we leave the realm of pure logic and enter the crime scene itself, the archive. Your eyes are now the microscope. The faded photograph, the daguerreotype, is the slide upon which the evidence rests. For a moment, I want you to silence the historian's voice in your head, the one implanted in you since childhood. Do not listen to the official story. Just look. Observe with us. Here, frozen in silver and time, is the Grand Erie Canal. The narrative tells you this is a monument to pioneer spirit. But your eyes tell you something else. Your eyes detect a profound and disturbing anomaly. Focus first on the infrastructure. They must keep the crime scenes separate, lest we see the pattern of the killer. But the physical evidence refuses to be compartmentalized. It screams a truth that geography cannot contain. Let us embark on a journey that violates the borders on their maps. First, we stand on the banks of the Caledonian Canal in Scotland, supposedly built in the early 1800s to connect a series of locks. We see the same impossible masonry. Gigantic, precision-cut stone blocks forming walls of a scale utterly unnecessary for the passage of a few sailing barges. The engineering is clean, severe, and profoundly powerful. Now in the space of a single breath, we cross an ocean. We are in Canada, looking at the first Welling Canal. The timeline is the same, the supposed purpose is the same, and the signature is identical. The same cyclopean blocks, the same masterful interlocking patterns, the same disquieting sense of permanence, as if it were built to last for millennia, not to serve the fleeting commercial interests of a fledgling colony. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. We are told two different cultures, with different tools and different needs, separated by the vast and treacherous Atlantic, independently conceived and executed the exact same impossible style of engineering at the exact same moment in history. The canal walls. These are not rough-hewn stones piled by farmers. These are cyclopean blocks of granite and limestone, many weighing several tons, cut and dressed with a geometric precision that would make a Roman engineer weep. The seams between them are tighter than a razor's edge, a silent testament to a lost science of stonework. The sheer scale is baffling, a waterway carved through a continent with the casual might of a god. The architecture is divine. Now, shift your focus to the user of this divine architecture. Floating on the water is a pathetic wooden barge, a splintered shell of crude planks, barely seaworthy. It is being pulled by a single, exhausted mule, trudging through the mud on a towpath. On the barge, a man in filthy rags, his face etched with a hardship that the cold, perfect stone beside him cannot comprehend. This is the peasant paradox. The technology of the container is 1,000 years more advanced than the technology of the content. It is the visual equivalent of discovering a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier being used as a ferry for a single ox cart. The dissonance is a scream that echoes across the century. The infrastructure is impossibly sophisticated for the toolset of its alleged user. It is an effect without a plausible cause. And it does not stop. We leap across the sea again, to Sweden, to the Gotha Canal, another early 19th century marvel. And there it is again, unmistakable. The same architectural DNA. The sheer, perfectly dressed granite walls, the impossible weight of the stones, the mathematical precision of the construction. It is not similar. It is a direct copy, a standardized model. We can jump to Russia and trace the Volga-Baltic waterway system and find sections of ancient stonework that dwarf the 19th century additions. It is a planetary blueprint. What we are seeing is not the coincidental invention of canal building by disparate nations. We are seeing the unearthed and repurposed fragments of a single, integrated global system. This is not the work of Swedes or Scots or Canadians. It is the footprint of an empire whose existence has been surgically removed from our memory. The signature of a unified civilization whose name we are forbidden to speak. The Tartarian Empire, The new nations of the post-reset world did not build these systems. They were simply the first squatters to arrive after the catastrophe, each claiming a piece of the inherited infrastructure and hastily writing a self-congratulatory fable of creation around it. This realization transforms the map. The canals are not isolated lines. They are the severed arteries of a single planetary body. Look closely at this image. If your own logic confirms the absurdity, if you can feel the cognitive dissonance vibrating from this century-old photograph, then you are a witness. Affirm what you see. Your signal ensures this transmission breaks through the static of the official narrative, reaching others who are ready to awaken. Now, let us zoom in. Let us examine the wounds on these ancient structures. See this stone bridge? A magnificent arch, a symphony of keystones and voussoirs, designed to span the water. But notice where it ends. It plunges directly into the soil, halfway up its own height. There is no foundation visible, no logical starting point. The ground itself has risen, swallowing the legs of this stone giant. This is not a design choice. This is a sign of burial. A scar left by a cataclysmic deposition of earth, the event we now call the mud flood. The banks of these canals are not banks at all. They are the exposed spine of a buried titan, the top course of a colossal wall system that extends dozens of feet below the mud you walk on. And where the original structure is damaged, the evidence becomes even more damning. Look here. The original, intricate stonework, a masterpiece of polygonal masonry, is suddenly and brutally interrupted. But if they were arteries, what did they carry, and where were they going? The official narrative tells us they connected lakes and rivers for trade. A plausible, simple, and utterly insufficient explanation. It ignores the second part of the global pattern. These grand canals invariably connect to, or flow near, another enigmatic structure from our inherited past, the star forts. The cover story is that the forts were built to protect the canals. This is the logic of the control matrix. It always inverts the truth. It places the cart before the horse to ensure you never understand the nature of the engine. The truth is the reverse. The canals were not built to be protected by the forts. The canals were built to feed the forts. These star forts, with their impossibly complex geometric bastions, were not merely defensive structures. They were nodes. They were power plants, resonant chambers, capacitors, and a planetary energy grid. And the medium for this energy was the one thing the canals were designed to move with impossible efficiency: water. Not just any water. Water, subjected to specific frequencies, its viscosity altered, its molecular structure aligned by the resonant properties of the entire system. The canals were waveguides. The water was the energized lifeblood, and the forts were the vital organs of the planet. A patch of cheap, crumbling brick. A smear of coarse, modern concrete. These are not repairs. They are confessions cast in mortar. They are the clearest possible admission that the inheritors of this system, the men in top hats who claimed it as their own, had absolutely no idea how to replicate the original Antiquitech. They could only patch it, like squatters living in a palace, plugging a hole in a stained glass window with cardboard. Every crude repair is a signature of their ignorance. The crime scene is not just the canal itself, but the clumsy, brutal alterations made upon it. We are not looking at a world being built. We are looking at the salvaged ruins of a world that was destroyed, and then shamelessly claimed. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight. Now we must dismantle the alibi they built to conceal it. And so we arrive at the story. The one they tell in classrooms, the one they print in glossy textbooks with heroic illustrations of determined men against an untamed wilderness. It is a comforting story. A simple story. And like all meticulously crafted fables, it begins to disintegrate under the slightest pressure of logical inquiry. They call it history. We have come to recognize it as a lullaby for amnesiacs. They use this energy for functions we can now only guess at. Atmospheric stabilization, the generation of a planetary energy field for wireless power, sonic defense systems that could turn armies to dust, long-range communication through the Earth itself. The canals were not the quaint horse-drawn highways of the 19th century. They were the primary infrastructure of a Type 1 civilization. We are looking at a dead technology, a planetary circuit board, shorted out by a cataclysm, its components then claimed by primitive tribes who saw a power station and called it a fort, who saw a resonant waveguide and called it a ditch. This signature of the old world is not confined to canals and forts. It is everywhere. It is hiding in plain sight. This is the most profound and disturbing part of the revelation. The pattern is not just in these remote, monumental structures. It is likely in your own city, the old city hall, the central post office, the county courthouse with its granite foundations, impossibly large doors, and architecture that feels displaced, inherited. Look at the buildings in your own town that predate the 1920s. Do you see the same cyclopean masonry in the foundations? Do you see windows that start at ground level, suggesting the street level has risen? The official narrative is not a record of events. It is a carefully administered sedative designed to prevent us from asking the most obvious questions about the world we inhabit. Let us examine their primary exhibit, the Erie Canal, the jewel in the crown of 19th century American ingenuity. We are told with unwavering conviction that this monumental artery of water, 584 kilometers long, complete with 83 complex locks, was carved out of the savage landscape of upstate New York by Irish immigrants armed with little more than shovels, pickaxes, and black powder. And the timeline for this miracle, a mere 8 years, from 1817 to 1825. Let that number settle in your mind. 8 years. A simple calculation reveals the sheer absurdity of this claim. It requires the completion of over 200 meters of a fully functional, stone-lined canal every single day without fail. 200 meters, day after day, week after week, for 920 consecutive days, through frozen winters and sweltering summers, through solid rock ridges and mosquito-infested swamps. This wasn't merely digging a ditch, it was terraforming. It involved felling millions of trees, excavating and moving millions of cubic tons of earth and stone, and then, most critically, lining the channel with precisely cut masonry. All of this supposedly accomplished by a workforce with no heavy machinery, no steam shovels, no railways to haul away the debris. Do you see a level of craftsmanship and beauty utterly out of sync with the official story of pioneers building log cabins? These are not Beaux-Arts or neoclassical buildings. Those are classification labels created by the control matrix to compartmentalize and neutralize the evidence. They are all pieces of the same system. They are the local terminals of that same global grid. These structures are everywhere. Take a walk, look closer. The evidence of the crime is the very foundation of the world you inhabit. Tell us where you see it. The great silence can only be broken when enough of us start comparing notes. We are left then with an uncomfortable silence. A global network of impossible engineering, bearing the identical signature of a single, masterful hand. From the forests of Sweden to the highlands of Scotland to the heartland of a young America. The official narrative tells us these were separate projects, born of national pride and local genius. But the stones themselves tell a different story. They whisper of a unified world, a connected civilization whose very existence has been meticulously scrubbed from the record. And this forces us to ask the most tragic question of all. If we are the inheritors of this global empire, why do we behave like amnesiacs living in the ruins of a palace we no longer recognize? The cognitive dissonance is staggering. We see the lithographs they themselves commissioned. A few men, a tired-looking mule, a primitive wooden crane, and we are expected to believe this scene is responsible for a structure that would challenge the full might of a modern industrial state. It is a logistical paradox, a mathematical impossibility presented as historical fact. And what of the 83 locks? These are not simple dams. They are intricate works of hydraulic engineering requiring vast quantities of waterproof cement, massive iron gates, and stonework of a quality that rivals and often surpasses that of ancient Rome. Each one a monumental project in its own right, yet according to the official fairy tale, these were constructed concurrently with the 200 meters of daily excavation. The narrative simply asks us to suspend our belief in reality, to accept a miracle without a divine explanation. Does this sound like a plausible historical account to you? Or does it sound like a cover narrative, hastily written to explain the presence of an infrastructure that was simply found? This brings us to the second pillar of their fragile story, the myth of the founder. Every one of these great canals is assigned a heroic figure, a singular visionary who willed it into existence. For the Erie Canal, it is DeWitt Clinton. The answer lies not in engineering, but in anthropology. It lies in the profound and sorrowful phenomenon known as a cargo cult. We have become a cargo cult civilization. We are the islanders who, after the great ships and planes of the gods departed, began building effigies of their technology from bamboo and vine. We build landing strips in the jungle, hoping to summon the return of a power we can only imitate, not comprehend. We are tenants in a technological marvel, yet we use the master bedroom to store firewood and mistake the fusion reactor in the basement for a furnace. This is the mimesis of the survivor. It is the sad, ritualistic mimicry of those who came after the great cataclysm, after the reset. Look again at the old lithographs. See the impossibly perfect canal, a channel of cut granite humming with the ghost of a forgotten physics, and then see the crude wooden barge pulled by a single exhausted mule. This is not a picture of construction. This is a picture of profound misunderstanding. The inheritors, the survivors, stumbled upon these vast, silent waterways. They could not grasp the principles of harmonic resonance or controlled water viscosity that once made them flow. They could not reactivate the cymatic frequencies that propelled vessels effortlessly across continents. For the Canal du Midi in France, it is Pierre-Paul Riquet. These men are painted as geniuses, as demigods of civil engineering, who conceived of these networks from nothing. But this is a classic technique of the engineering of forgetting. These men were not creators. They were appropriators. They were the first wave of post-reset administrators, tasked with surveying, repairing, and repurposing a system they could not comprehend. Their celebrated blueprints and plans were not documents of invention. They were recovery maps. They were conducting an autopsy on a dying giant, charting the arteries of a pre-existing global network, and claiming its corpse as their own creation. They didn't build a system to float their primitive barges. They found a degraded energy grid and put a wooden boat in it, because that was the only application their limited understanding could conceive. They were the architects of a profound misunderstanding, the pioneers of a cargo cult that continues to this day. We are asked to believe that these men, living in an age of horse-drawn carriages and candlelight, possessed a logistical and project management capacity that dwarfs our own. We are shown their portraits, their solemn faces staring out from the pages of history, and we are told to see them as founders of a new age. All they saw was a ditch, a long, well-built ditch with water in it. And so they applied their own primitive brute force logic to a system of sublime elegance. They saw a gradient and thought, we must defeat the hill. They did not understand the hill was irrelevant to the original design, so they invented the lock. The lock is not a monument to their ingenuity. It is a tombstone marking their ignorance. It is the act of putting a crude, sputtering diesel engine onto a silent, anti-gravitic craft they found abandoned in a field. They forced the system to work in a way they could understand, breaking its true function in the process. They saw a conveyance for goods, and so they hitched up a mule, the beast of burden, a perfect symbol for their own limited, mechanical worldview, forever straining against a system that was designed to be effortless. This pattern of primitive repurposing is everywhere, once you learn to see it. We look at the great cathedrals with their spires and intricate metallic geometry, and we are told they were simply for worship. We have turned antennas into crosses. We look at the massive, ornate brick structures we call power stations or waterworks, often built with more grandeur than a palace, and we accept the mundane explanation. But we, the forensic investigators of this historical crime scene, see something else. We see men standing in front of a colossal, inherited technology, posing for a picture, like a child claiming to have built the pyramid he was found playing on. The story they have given us is hollow. It lacks a logistical foundation. It lacks a technological supply chain. It lacks a credible timeline. It is a ghost story, where the grandest effects have no visible cause. And the most haunting question remains: do you truly believe that a civilization capable of executing such projects with primitive tools would be the same one depicted in the photographs, living in wooden shacks and struggling with fire and disease? Or is it more likely that they were the survivors, the inheritors, the bewildered tenants of a world built by giants, doing their best to write a story that made them the masters of a house they did not build and could never hope to replicate? The fragility of the official narrative is not a crack in the wall of history. It is a gaping chasm, and through it we are beginning to see the faint light of a much older and far more magnificent dawn. We have been told a story of rugged pioneers, of heroic immigrants with little more than shovels in their hands and determination in their hearts, carving civilization out of a wilderness. We have turned resonant energy nodes into temples for a new religion called public utilities. We are a civilization of mimics, performing the rituals of our ancestors without understanding their meaning. We flip a switch on the wall and call it science, with no comprehension of the vast, inherited infrastructure that makes the miracle possible. An infrastructure we could not hope to build ourselves today. The great ceremonies we read about, the grand openings of these canals, were not celebrations of creation. They were rituals of appropriation. When the governor poured a ceremonial barrel of water into the newly completed Erie Canal, it was not an act of inauguration. It was a baptism of forgetting. It was the political elite of a new world order laying claim to a piece of inexplicable and powerful antiquitech. They were domesticating a dragon, turning a machine of unknown purpose into a simple tool of commerce. Its true function was lost, deliberately buried under a new, symbolic function, a testament to the progress of the nation-state, a monument to their manufactured history. The technology was neutralized, its power converted from the physical to the political. A new narrative was laid over the old reality like a cheap coat of paint. We live inside this cognitive dissonance every day. It is a comforting narrative, one that underpins the very foundation of our modern identity, but it is a story that dissolves under the cold, impartial scrutiny of mathematics. It is time to audit the books, to examine the ledger of this grand project, and to expose the logistical black hole at the heart of the official history. Let us set aside the romantic lithographs and the political speeches. We will deal only in tons, in cubic meters, in man-hours, and in the unyielding laws of physics and economics. The cover narrative presents the Erie Canal as its crowning achievement. 584 kilometers of waterway, including 83 locks, supposedly dug, blasted, and built in a mere 8 years, from 1817 to 1825. Let us pause and truly comprehend this claim. This is not a simple ditch. This is a structure of cyclopean scale, lined with millions of tons of precisely cut stone, built through dense forests, across malarial swamps, and over solid bedrock. The official history assigns this Herculean task to a workforce of largely unskilled laborers using hand tools and animal power. The numbers, however, tell a different story. They scream of an impossibility. Let us be conservative. The later construction of the Suez Canal, a project undertaken with the benefit of steam-powered dredgers and a far more advanced industrial base, involved the removal of approximately 75 million cubic meters of earth. We feel it as a low hum of anxiety, a sense of profound loss we cannot name. We are told we are the pinnacle of civilization, yet we are surrounded by evidence of a past that was far more advanced. We are cosmic orphans, wandering the halls of our ancestral home, convinced we built it ourselves with our own two hands, despite all the evidence to the contrary. The memory of what we were is a ghost limb, an ache for a power and a knowledge that has been severed from us. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, of a cargo cult living in the shadow of forgotten gods, resonates with you, if you have ever felt that something is profoundly wrong with the story we have been told, then check to see if you are subscribed. We need awakened minds around here. We need to piece together the fragmented memories, because our ancestors did not just leave us canals and cathedrals. They left us a warning, and the key to understanding that warning lies in the nature of the cataclysm that erased them, the event that filled these perfect channels with mud and our minds with a fog of engineered amnesia. We are a cargo cult civilization, living amidst the echoes of a technology we can no longer comprehend. The Erie Canal, given its length and depth, would have required moving a comparable volume, if not more, when one accounts for the primitive methods allegedly used. Let us take this figure as our baseline. 75 million cubic meters over 8 years. 8 years is 2,920 days. This means that every single day, without fail, through blistering summers and frozen winters, the workforce would have had to excavate and transport over 25,600 cubic meters of earth, rock, and mud. What does that volume look like? A standard horse-drawn cart of the era could perhaps carry 1 cubic meter of soil. This means that every day a fleet of 25,600 carts would need to be filled, moved, emptied, and returned. Let us assume a 10-hour workday. That is over 2,500 carts being loaded and dispatched every single hour, 42 carts every minute. a cart leaving the excavation site every 1.5 seconds. This creates a logistical paradox, an unbroken, suffocating chain of animal-drawn traffic, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. The very logistics required to remove the debris would have been a project more vast and complex than the construction of the canal itself. But a functioning system does not simply fall into disuse. It is decommissioned. It is silenced. The mechanism of this silencing was not a slow decay. It was a single catastrophic event, a planetary reset. They call it the mud flood, a name too gentle, too natural for the crime that was committed. This was no act of God. It was a tactical deployment. Imagine a frequency weapon, or a targeted cosmic event that induced global soil liquefaction. The Earth itself turned to liquid mud, a wave of sediment, meters high, that did not just bury cities, but infiltrated the very arteries of the previous world. The canals, those conduits of energy and transport, were choked. The star forts, those nodes of power, were inundated. The grid was deactivated. A planetary stroke, leaving the global body paralyzed, its memory wiped clean. And into this silence, this devastation, walked the inheritors, the ones we call the parasites. They were not builders, they were scavengers. Opportunists who found a world on its knees, a technological marvel disabled and ready for plunder. Their first and most crucial act was not reconstruction, but the systematic demolition of memory. This was the birth of the engineering of forgetting, a campaign more brutal than any physical war, because its target was the human mind itself. Where did they put it all? Where are the vast man-made hills, the spoil heaps that should line the entire length of the canal? They do not exist. We are presented with an effect, a colossal one, without any evidence of its primary cause, and this calculation only accounts for the removal of earth. It does not account for the stone. The walls of these canals are not made of rough-hewn fieldstone. They are composed of millions of multi-ton blocks of granite and limestone, cut with a precision that modern machinery would struggle to replicate at such a scale and speed. Where was the industrial infrastructure to support this? Where were the quarries? Show us the maps from the early 1800s that identify a quarrying operation capable of extracting, cutting, and dressing millions of tons of granite in less than a decade. They do not exist. Where were the fleets of specialized wagons, the systems of cranes and levers, and the thousands of skilled masons required to transport and place these blocks with such perfect alignment? The narrative is silent. It gives us a finished product of impossible quality and offers us only a pickaxe and a mule as the means of its creation. This is the cognitive dissonance we are forced to swallow. It began with fire. The great fires of the 19th century, Chicago, Boston, Seattle, were not accidents. They were surgical strikes against memory. They were not burning down cities. They were burning down archives. Town halls, libraries, municipal records offices, every piece of paper that contained the true history, the real deeds, the actual construction logs of the infrastructure they were claiming as their own, was turned to ash. A great and terrible archive burning, conducted on a global scale. With the evidence gone, they erected the new narrative. They commissioned the paintings of heroic, rugged pioneers with shovels and mules, standing proudly before cyclopean structures they could never have built. They wrote the hagiographies of their visionary founders, men who were not creators, but merely the first and most successful squatters of the new era. And to seal the lie, they perfectly timed the rollout of a new technology, photography. The first photographs do not show a world being built. They show a world in ruins being reclaimed. They show empty cities, impossibly grand and ornate, with a handful of people in horse-drawn carts navigating muddy streets. We were told this was the beginning of our civilization. It was the aftermath of the destruction of theirs. This is the masterstroke of their engineering of forgetting. We see a nuclear aircraft carrier and are told it was built by men in wooden rowboats. Now, let us audit the supply chain for the workforce itself. A man performing hard manual labor requires at least 4,000 calories a day. For a workforce of, say, 30,000 men, a conservative estimate for such a monumental task, that is 120 million calories per day. This translates into tens of thousands of tons of food, grain, salted meat, produce, that must be procured, transported, and distributed into what was then a sparsely populated wilderness every single week. It requires a logistical train of supply wagons that would rival a major military campaign. It requires farms, slaughterhouses, granaries, and a distribution network that simply did not exist in upstate New York in 1817. And what of the tools? The thousands of iron shovels, pickaxes, and drills? Iron and steel of that era were brittle. They would break, they would wear down. Where were the forges and blacksmiths, an army of them, working around the clock to produce and repair tens of thousands of tools? The official record, the industrial footprint that such an enterprise would have inevitably left behind, is a void, a perfect, echoing silence. It is a ghost industry, a phantom supply chain for a phantom army of builders. They did not just invent a new story. They took possession of the crime scene and called it a construction site. They presented us with photographs of a corpse and told us it was a baby picture. They gave us amnesia and called it history. They buried our inheritance under a mountain of mud, and then they buried the truth under a mountain of lies. The silence is their greatest weapon. Sharing this information is our defense. Send this to someone who needs to wake up. The mechanism of silence was never perfect. The engineering of forgetting left cracks in the foundation of its own lies. And through these cracks, we have begun to see the world as it is, not as we were told it was. We are a species with amnesia, a culture of orphans, living inside the grand, silent houses of our ancestors, convinced we built them ourselves with our own primitive hands. We celebrate the pouring of a concrete overpass, while working in cathedrals of stone and brick we could not hope to replicate today, not with the same speed, not with the same grace, not with the same soul. This is the ultimate cognitive dissonance of our time. We are tenants in our own inheritance, paying rent to the very parasites who erased our memory of the deed. We are faced with a stark conclusion. The numbers do not lie. They do not have a political agenda or a national mythology to uphold. They are the cold, hard skeleton of reality. And they tell us that these canals were not built in the 19th century. They were found, they were inherited. The work undertaken by figures like DeWitt Clinton was not an act of creation, but an act of restoration, of salvage. They cleared a few centuries of mud and debris from a pre-existing, globally integrated water and energy system. They patched the crumbling sections with their comparatively primitive brick and concrete, scars that are still visible today. They reverse-engineered the system's most basic function, flotation, and installed the crude mechanical locks to bypass the damaged or incomprehensible original technology. The story of the heroic immigrant laborers is the cover narrative. It was created to explain an inheritance that could not be denied. It was a fable woven to transfer ownership of this inherited technology from a forgotten global civilization to the newly formed nation-states of a post-reset world. They did not build these waterways. They simply claimed them. They wrote themselves into history as creators when they were merely squatters. Mathematics is a harsh mistress. She does not bend to patriotism or heroic tales. We are told to feel pride in our progress, a slow, painful crawl out of the mud, when the evidence all around us screams that we are the survivors of a fall from an impossible height. The true human story is not one of linear ascent. It is the story of a great loss, a story of reclamation. Every time you see a canal lock, you are not looking at a monument to ingenuity. You are looking at a tombstone, a memorial to our own ignorance, a crude patch placed upon a machine of sublime elegance. Every perfectly cut megalith, every impossible star fort, is not a relic of the past. It is a question asked in the language of stone, aimed directly at the heart of the present. And the question is this: who were you before they told you who you are? To investigate these anomalies, to audit their impossible logistics, is therefore not a pastime. It is an act of sacred archaeology upon the human soul. It is the beginning of a process of recovery. We are not merely uncovering old canals or buried cities. We are unearthing the suppressed blueprint of our own potential. We are remembering a state of being where humanity was not a plague upon the planet, but its custodian. And the math of these canals proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the official history is one of the greatest engineering fictions ever told. These numbers are not a theory, they are a calculation. They are a receipt for a product that was never delivered. The numbers do not have an agenda. They are cold, hard, and unforgiving. If you can reconcile these figures within the official narrative, if you can produce the ledgers for the food, the manifests for the tools, the geological surveys for the quarries, and the traffic models for the debris removal, by all means, present your logistics chain. We are waiting. The logistical audit proves the impossibility. The mathematics of the official narrative simply do not compute. We are left with an effect without a cause, a colossal structure without a plausible origin story. But the anomaly is not confined to the swamps of upstate New York. The cover narrative begins to fray at the edges, and then it dissolves completely when we dare to zoom out. We have been conditioned by the control matrix to think in terms of isolated national projects. The American Erie Canal, the French Canal du Midi, the Swedish Gotha Canal. These are presented as distinct chapters in separate books, written by different authors. This is a cornerstone of the engineered amnesia, a civilization whose technology was in harmony with the resonant frequencies of the earth itself. The path forward is not to build more, but to remember how, to reactivate the knowledge that sleeps in our blood, and to reclaim the dignity that was stolen from us. The truth was never buried deep. It was simply submerged, waiting beneath the thin, muddy layer of a fabricated history for those with the courage to look down. This investigation does not end here. It is only the beginning of the great unraveling. If the frequency of this truth resonates within you, if you feel the call to continue digging, to deconstruct the cover narrative piece by piece with us, then your real work has just begun. There is no subscription button for a memory, there is only a choice. Welcome to the resistance.